The summer heat clung stubbornly to the plains around Sycamore Bend, turning the dry grasslands into a soft, golden haze. It was a town that had learned to live quietly, the kind of place where strangers were noticed and long grudges were passed down like family heirlooms. It was not a place for secrets, not really, yet one man had managed to keep his tucked safely away beneath a worn hat and a name no one asked too many questions about. Clara Hayes had never seen herself staying here. 5 years ago, she'd promised herself she was only coming back to help her father recover after his heart surgery. But then her father's recovery turned into slow mornings on the porch. Her small nursing job at the local clinic expanded into something resembling a permanent position, and the sharp edges of her ambition softened into something she barely recognized. She was coming off a long shift, the sky melting into amber and bruised purple when they brought him in. Bar fight, she guessed under her breath as the doors swung open and two ranch hands staggered in, half carrying a third man between them. His shirt was bloodied at the shoulder, and one eye was swelling shut, but he waved off their help as soon as his boots touched the ground. "No fight," one of the hands said, looking embarrassed. "Stubborn fool took a fence post to the arm fixin' the east pasture." The man lifted his head then, and Clara got her first good look at him. He was older than the farm boys who usually found their way into trouble, though not by much, maybe mid-30s. Dark hair curling damply against his temples, a day's worth of scruff along his jaw. His skin was sun-browned and scarred from years of outdoor work, and there was something about the way he carried himself, even injured, that made Clara's chest tighten unexpectedly. She took the clipboard from the receptionist and approached him calmly. "All right, Cowboy, let's see what we're working with." He didn't argue, just slid onto the examination table with a tight-lipped grunt of pain. Clara snapped on a pair of gloves and worked methodically, cutting away his blood-soaked sleeve to expose the wound. It was ugly, deep enough to need stitches, but not jagged, thankfully. He'd be sore for a while, and she suspected the shoulder was bruised to hell. "Name?" she asked, focusing on cleaning the wound. "Wyatt," he said simply. "No last name," she prompted, glancing up briefly. Wyatt met her gaze for the first time then, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his storm-gray eyes. "Wyatt Cole," he answered, voice low and unhurried. She nodded, filing the name away. It didn't ring a bell, strange in a town like this, but she had work to do. They settled into a rhythm, Clara working in silence, Wyatt tolerating her ministrations with stoic patience. "You're lucky," she said after a while, setting the last suture. "Missed anything serious. Keep it clean and don't be a hero with it." He smiled faintly, a tilt of his mouth rather than a full expression. "No promises." Clara rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. She started wrapping his arm, her fingers brushing his calloused skin. Close up, he smelled faintly of leather, cedar, and dust, and something else she couldn't quite place but felt stubbornly familiar. "New in town?" she asked, partly to distract herself. Wyatt shrugged with his good shoulder. "Been around, not much for the spotlight." The words were simple enough, but something about the way he said them left an aftertaste of loneliness. Clara finished the bandage and stepped back. "You'll need a follow-up in a few days," she said, peeling off her gloves. "If you start feeling feverish, come back sooner." He nodded, sliding carefully off the table. For a moment they stood there in a quiet, charged space, neither speaking, neither moving. "Thanks, Nurse Hayes," he said finally, surprising her. Most patients didn't bother remembering her name unless they had to. "You're welcome, Mr. Cole," she said, tilting her head, studying him. "Take care of yourself." He gave a short nod, adjusted his hat over his dark hair, and walked out of the clinic into the burning sunset. Clara watched him go, an odd prickle at the back of her neck. She told herself it was nothing, just the exhaustion talking. She had patients to see, charts to file, dinner to scrounge up. But something about Wyatt Cole, his quiet strength, his battered dignity, stayed with her long after the automatic doors slid shut. If she had known then how much he was about to change her life, she might have run after him, might have asked him to stay a while longer. But at the time, he was just a stubborn cowboy with a busted arm and a smile that barely touched his weary eyes. Nothing more. Or so she thought. The following days unfolded like any other late summer in Sycamore Bend. Clara busied herself with the usual parade of sprained ankles, stubborn coughs, and kids who thought they could outrun barbed wire fences. She told herself she had forgotten about Wyatt Cole, that he was just another name on another clipboard. Until he came back. He walked into the clinic 2 mornings later, dust still clinging to his jeans, hat in his hands like he wasn't sure if he was meant to stay or go. Clara had been arguing with the receptionist about a missing supply order when she spotted him, his figure half hidden by the bright slant of the sun through the glass doors. Something shifted in her, not a lurch exactly, but something smaller, quieter, a pulling at the edges. "You're early," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she waved him into exam room 3. Wyatt shrugged, figured better safe than sorry. It wasn't the worst excuse she'd heard, but it wasn't the real reason he was there either. Clara could feel it. She checked the wound, already healing neatly under her handiwork, and rewrapped it with clean bandages. She worked in silence, feeling the weight of his gaze. He wasn't watching her in the way men sometimes watched women, with calculation or lazy appreciation. He watched her like he was memorizing, piece by piece, without even meaning to. "How's the shoulder?" she asked, keeping her voice clinical. "Hurts less than it should," he said with a half smile. "That's the magic of proper care." She scribbled a few notes on his chart. "You're lucky you came in when you did. Infection would have had you down bad." Wyatt gave a low grunt of agreement, but he looked uncomfortable under her praise, like he wasn't used to being told he'd done something right. Before he could find a way to dodge the moment, the town's old doctor poked his head into the room. "Clara, can you swing by the pharmacy later? Tell them we need more sterile packs." She nodded, but Wyatt shifted at the mention of the pharmacy. "I can drive you," he offered almost too quickly. Clara blinked at him, caught off guard. It wasn't a long walk to the pharmacy, just down the main street. But the idea of stepping out of the clinic, of letting the dry wind tug at her sleeves and the sun burn the dust gold while Wyatt Cole drove her in some battered old pickup, it was tempting in a way that unsettled her. She hesitated just a second too long. "It's fine," she said lightly, "thanks though." Something like disappointment flickered across Wyatt's face, gone as fast as it had come. He settled his hat back on his head, dipping it low in a quiet farewell. "Take it easy, Nurse Hayes." He left without another word. That should have been the end of it, a brief encounter stitched into the fabric of her long days. But Sycamore Bend wasn't a place that let things go. The next morning, Clara spotted him again. Not at the clinic, but out by the farmer's market, standing near the Mason family's peach stand with a dog-eared wallet in one hand and a crate of produce at his boots. Later, she saw him outside the elementary school, hammering a crooked, volunteers needed sign back into the dirt after the wind had knocked it down. He wasn't talking to anyone, he barely even looked up. He just did what needed doing, blending into the background like a shadow with rough hands and an endless patience for small, forgotten things. The third time she ran into him, it was near the library. Clara had dropped a stack of community health brochures she'd been trying to distribute, the papers scattered like startled birds across the sidewalk. Before she could even curse, Wyatt was there, kneeling down, gathering them up with careful, methodical movements. He handed her the stack, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. "Thanks," she said, slightly breathless. He tipped his hat, just lending a hand. And then he was gone again, moving through Sycamore Bend like a ghost who didn't want to be remembered. But Clara did remember. She started to notice the small repairs around town that no one else seemed to be claiming. The broken park bench that got quietly replaced. The busted swing set that reappeared, welded and sturdy, at the school playground. The trail of good deeds that no one talked about but somehow everyone benefited from. At first, she thought maybe the town council had gotten off their lazy butts. But Sycamore Bend was not known for its efficiency. It gnawed at her, the way Wyatt seemed to appear just when something needed fixing, but never long enough to be thanked. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Clara found herself lingering by the town square as the sun dipped low, painting everything in molten hues. The statue of the town founder stood watch as it always did, the fountain beside it burbling quietly. She leaned against a lamppost, watching the kids play tag across the grass, watching the old men play checkers by the bench. And there he was. Wyatt Cole standing at the edge of the square as still as a photograph, watching too, but differently. Not part of the scene, separate from it somehow. A man who gave everything and asked nothing. Clara crossed her arms, unsettled. He wasn't just some cowboy with a busted shoulder. He was something more. And for the first time since she'd stitched him up, Clara realized she wasn't done with Wyatt Cole, not by a long shot. Clara didn't set out to follow him. At least that's what she told herself when she found her boots crunching along the gravel path behind the square, keeping a casual distance from the tall figure ahead. Wyatt moved with an easy, unhurried gait, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jeans. He didn't seem to notice her, or maybe he did and simply didn't care. The trail curved past the last row of old brick buildings, dipping down toward the river where the town gave way to fields stitched together by narrow dirt roads. Clara almost turned back. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. A confrontation, an explanation, maybe just a glimpse behind the guarded lines of his face. But before she could lose her nerve, Wyatt stopped. He crouched down beside a broken wooden fence, inspecting the splintered rails with a thoughtful frown. His hands, broad and roughened, moved deftly, measuring the damage like he was already planning how to set it right. Without thinking, Clara stepped forward. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet. Wyatt didn't startle. He just straightened slowly, turning to face her with a resigned lift of his brows. "Didn't mean to get caught," he said, almost apologetically. Clara planted her hands on her hips. "You're the one fixing up the town, aren't you? The benches, the playground, the fountain pump last winter when it froze over." Wyatt said nothing. His silence was its own kind of confession. Clara shook her head, half in disbelief, half in something closer to admiration. "Why?" He glanced past her toward the river, where the last of the sunlight licked the water in gold ribbons. His voice was quiet when he answered. "Because somebody ought to." It wasn't pride, it wasn't even stubbornness. It was something simpler, heavier, a kind of duty stitched into the bones. Clara stepped closer, studying him. "You're not from here," she said. "Not really. So why do you care what happens to Sycamore Bend?" Wyatt's mouth twitched into a humorless smile. "Maybe I got tired of watching places fall apart." There was a history there, wounds he wasn't offering up, not yet. Clara felt something inside her shift, the careful distance she kept between herself and her patients, between herself and this town, bending under the weight of understanding. "You ever think about letting people know?" she asked. "Might not hurt to let them say thank you." Wyatt rolled a pebble under his boot heel, thinking. "That's not why I do it," he said finally. And somehow Clara believed him. Believed that he wasn't looking for recognition or praise or even belonging. He just needed the world around him to be a little less broken, even if it was only in ways most people would never notice. A hush settled between them, not awkward but fragile. Clara found herself searching for something more to say, something that wouldn't shatter the fragile honesty hanging in the air. Instead, a crack of thunder split the horizon. Both of them looked up to see a fast-moving storm clawing its way across the sky, swallowing the last light. The sweet scent of ozone rolled over the fields, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the broken fence. "Come on," Wyatt said, nodding toward the road. "There's an old maintenance shed up the hill, better than standing here like fools." Clara hesitated only a moment before following him, her heart pounding harder than it should have for such a simple choice. They made it to the shed just as the rain let loose, drumming against the tin roof with wild urgency. The inside was dusty and smelled faintly of hay and old wood, but it was dry. Wyatt shook out his hat and leaned it against the wall, running a hand through his damp hair. Clara crossed her arms, shivering a little in her thin clinic scrubs. Without a word, Wyatt shrugged out of his canvas jacket and offered it to her. Clara stared at it, then at him. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're soaked," he said evenly, no sense in being stubborn. Reluctantly, she accepted the jacket. It smelled like him, sun, leather, something quieter and earthier she couldn't name. She pulled it around her shoulders, feeling the lingering heat of his body in the lining. For a few minutes, they just listened to the rain hammer the roof, the world outside dissolving into mist and water. "You always like fixing things?" Clara asked after a while, her voice softer now. Wyatt shifted his weight against the wall, arms crossed loosely. "No," he said, "didn't used to." She waited, sensing more. "I spent a lot of years tearing things apart instead," he admitted. His voice was low, roughened at the edges. Hard habit to unlearn. Clara felt her throat tighten. She didn't push. She didn't need to. People didn't change unless something broke them first. She knew that from experience. She saw it every day in the clinic, in the tremble of hands, the tightness behind forced smiles. But standing there in the dim light of the old shed, wrapped in the borrowed warmth of a man who patched up a town without anyone asking him to, Clara realized something else too. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. Sometimes it was just one person doing one quiet, stubborn good thing after another, until the world started to stitch itself back together around them. And sometimes the ones who needed healing most were the ones who never asked for it at all. Wyatt shifted beside her, the rain still coming down hard. His sleeve brushed hers, a small, unintentional touch. Neither of them moved away. Neither of them spoke. And somehow that silence said everything that mattered. The rain eased by nightfall, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth and the creak of dripping tree limbs. Wyatt walked Clara back toward town without saying much, their boots squelching in the soft mud. A few times their hands brushed, tentative and fleeting, but neither reached out fully. The space between them felt delicate, like the hush after a prayer. When they reached the edge of Sycamore Bend, where the streetlights flickered to life one by one, Clara paused. The clinic glowed faintly down the block, its windows dark now that the day was done. "Thank you," she said, pulling Wyatt's jacket tighter around her shoulders. He nodded, as if he didn't quite know what to do with her gratitude, as if it mattered too much to him to be casual about it. Clara hesitated, then stood on tiptoe to press a kiss against his cheek. It was quick, almost shy. When she stepped back, Wyatt looked stunned, his hand half raised like he might catch the moment and hold it still. "Good night, Wyatt," she said, backing away before she could lose her nerve. He watched her go, unmoving, until she slipped inside the clinic and out of sight. Clara leaned against the door once it clicked shut behind her, heart hammering, head spinning. What was she doing? Letting him in would mean more than a few rainy afternoons and exchanged glances. It would mean peeling back the careful life she had built here, a life stitched together from safety and predictability. And Wyatt Cole was anything but predictable. Days passed, Wyatt didn't come into the clinic. Clara busied herself, telling herself it was better this way, safer. Yet every time the door chimed, she found herself glancing up, looking for the shape of him against the sun. Every time she crossed town, she checked the broken places he had once haunted, half hoping to find him hunched over a fence rail or tightening a bolt in the playground. He was nowhere. It wasn't until late Friday evening that she found a reason to head to the west side of town, where the old grain mill lined like a tired drunk against the fields. The mill had been abandoned for years, but sometimes the local kids used the grounds for bonfires and late-night mischief. Clara heard from a patient's worried mother that one of the boys had fallen and hurt himself. She volunteered to check it out. It was reckless, maybe, but something inside her buzzed with restless energy, a need she couldn't name. When she arrived, the scene was chaos. A handful of teenagers hovered uselessly near a sagging shed. One of them, a wiry boy she recognized from the clinic, sat cradling his wrist with a pale, pained look on his face. And kneeling beside him, steady and sure, was Wyatt. He was murmuring something low and calming as he splinted the boy's wrist with two straight sticks and a torn-up flannel shirt. His hands were gentle, efficient, the same hands that had fixed fences and playgrounds and benches without ever asking for thanks. Clara's throat tightened. He looked up then, catching her gaze across the muddy lot. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Something that made her legs want to fold underneath her. Without a word, Clara knelt beside him, checking the boy's pulse and reassuring him with a soft touch to his shoulder. Together, without needing to speak, they steadied the teenager and got him to his feet. They guided him to Clara's car, where she had a first aid kit tucked under the seat. After the boy was safely inside, head lolling against the window in exhausted relief, Wyatt lingered near the passenger side, the misty night wrapping around them. "You always show up when people need you," Clara said quietly. Wyatt looked away, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. Not always, not when it counted most. There was such rawness in his voice that Clara stepped closer without thinking. "What happened, Wyatt?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. He didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed, his chest rising and falling as if he was wrestling with something inside himself. Finally, he spoke. "Years ago," he said, staring out across the dark fields, "I had a brother, younger, wild, good heart, but he couldn't stay out of trouble if you paid him." Clara said nothing, just listened, the way she did with her patience when the words hurt too much to say quickly. "One night he called me, needed help, said he was in bad trouble, scared." Wyatt's voice cracked slightly. "I was too busy, too tired of bailing him out, told him to figure it out himself." The rain started again, light and tentative, soaking into the dirt around their boots. They found him the next morning, wrapped around a telephone pole, drunk, alone. Wyatt rubbed a hand over his face, like he could scrub the memory from his skin. "After that, I guess I figured if I could fix enough things, maybe." His voice trailed off. "Maybe he could fix himself." Clara reached out, laying her hand over his. His skin was rough, scarred, but so heartbreakingly human. "You can't patch over grief like a broken fence, Wyatt," she said softly. "You can't build enough to carry that weight alone." He looked at her then, really looked, and the walls he had so carefully built cracked, just enough for the truth to seep through. "I don't know how to be anything else," he said. Clara's heart twisted. She thought of her own buried losses, her own fears that had driven her into the safe arms of this small town. "You don't have to be anything else," she said. "You just have to let someone stand with you." It was a simple offer, spoken in the damp dark with the rain soaking through her hair and the night folding close around them. But for Wyatt Cole, it was a beginning. And for Clara Hayes, it was a choice. One she was finally ready to make. The following weeks unfolded in slow, tentative steps, as if neither Clara nor Wyatt dared to name the fragile thing growing between them. It wasn't a sweeping courtship, no candlelit dinners, no grand declarations. Instead, there were small things. Wyatt started showing up more often, not lurking at the edges of town but standing in plain sight. He rebuilt a broken bench outside the clinic, nodding a greeting when Clara walked by with a tray of files tucked under one arm. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the clinic's front door without being asked. And sometimes, late at night, Clara found him waiting by the square with a thermos of coffee in hand, a second one held out for her without a word. They would sit side by side on the steps of the old library, watching the moths dance under the streetlights, letting the town's sleepy rhythm settle between them. He never asked for more. She never demanded it. Somehow it was enough. Then came the Harvest Festival, the biggest event of the year for Sycamore Bend. The town square transformed overnight with strings of fairy lights, tables groaning under the weight of homemade pies, and children weaving between booths with sticky fingers and bright, laughing eyes. Clara found herself manning the first aid booth, passing out Band-Aids and allergy tablets, smiling until her cheeks hurt. She spotted Wyatt near the auction stand, helping an elderly man wrestle a stubborn table into place. His hair was damp with sweat, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the line of the old scar where she had stitched him months ago. She couldn't help but smile. It hit her then, sudden and sure, how much he had woven himself into the quiet fabric of her life, not through promises or sweeping gestures, but through presence. Through the way he showed up, steady and silent, filling in the empty spaces without demanding to be seen. A tap on her shoulder pulled her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Ellery, the town librarian, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Did you hear?" she whispered conspiratorially. "The town council finally found out who's been paying for all those repairs the past couple of years. The park renovations, the playground, the new roof on the library." Clara stiffened. She knew before Mrs. Ellery said it, knew with a sinking certainty. "Wyatt Cole," the older woman said, eyes wide. "He's been quietly footing the bills, anonymous donations, can you believe it?" Clara didn't answer. She just looked toward Wyatt, who was now kneeling to tie a little girl's loose shoelace, his face soft with concentration. She felt the truth of it settle deep into her bones. Wyatt wasn't just the man who mended fences and fixed swings. He was the reason Sycamore Bend still had a heart strong enough to beat. And somehow he had made her heart stronger too. Later, after the sun had dipped low and the festival wound down into a lazy sprawl of music and slow-dancing couples, Clara found Wyatt leaning against the side of the stage, a cup of cider in his hands. She walked up to him, her steps sure now, her heart calm. "Thought you didn't like the spotlight," she teased gently. Wyatt shrugged, a small, crooked smile tugging at his mouth. Didn't figure anyone notice. "They noticed," she said, "I noticed." He met her gaze then, his storm-gray eyes steady and unguarded. "I wasn't looking for thanks," he said, voice low. "I know," Clara said. She stepped closer until there was no space left for misunderstanding between them. "But you deserve it anyway." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The music from the stage floated over them, a soft, lilting tune about home and forgiveness and finding your way back. Wyatt set his cider down carefully on the edge of the stage. His hand found Clara's, rough and sure, threading their fingers together. He didn't pull her into some grand, sweeping kiss. He just held her hand, steady and sure, like a man who had spent a lifetime fixing broken things and had finally found something he didn't want to fix but to hold. The dance floor opened up around them, people moving aside without comment, as if the town itself understood the quiet gravity between them. Clara rested her head against Wyatt's chest, feeling the slow, even beat of his heart under her palm. He wrapped his arms around her with the same careful strength he had used to rebuild their battered little town. And there, under the string lights and the slow sweep of stars, Clara realized she had been wrong about herself all those years ago. She hadn't stayed in Sycamore Bend out of obligation. She had stayed because some part of her had been waiting. Waiting for a man with weathered hands and a wounded heart. Waiting for the quiet miracle of being seen and loved exactly as she was. And now, at last, she wasn't waiting anymore. She was home.